Okay, good morning, good Shavuot Tov. We are in chapter 4 of Shmuel Bet, and we left off. Well, we sort of had a bit of a spoiler because we were going to hear what was going on next, but you've probably forgotten the spoiler, so that's all right. We'll not tell it you again, and we can start afresh. So what we did last week was we did the first 3 psukim, and we'll just repeat those, Jeffrey, if you wouldn't mind. Chapter 4 from the top, first 3 psukim.
Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, and he despaired, and all Israel was shocked. 2 men, heads of legions, were with Saul's son. The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the second was Rechav, sons of Rimmon and Beeroth, the Beerothite of the tribe of Benjamin, since Beeroth was also considered part of Benjamin. The original Beerothites had fled to Gittaim, where they became sojourners to this day.
Okay, stop there. So that's what we did last week, and we spoke about Vayirpu Yadav. I think Jeffrey said that we. Oh, how did you describe that, Jeffrey? Right at the beginning.
2 men, heads of legions.
No, before that, the verse before that.
Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, and he despaired.
Then he despaired. Okay, Vayirpu Yadav. We spoke about it last week, and we sort of liked the translation in the Koren, which was that he lost the grip. They lost grip. Remember we spoke about that. Saul's son, we spoke about that. Ben Shaul, who's he talking about? He's talking about Ish-Boshet, but he's not given his name here because he's such a nobody. He's such a nothing that he doesn't even warrant to be given his name. And then these two, we spoke about these two fellows a little bit, Baanah and Rechav. We spoke about the name Rechav coming perhaps as he was a charioteer. We spoke about Rimon, and we spoke about Bet Rimon, the kibbutz Hadati, and we spoke about Gittaim, which is probably Gat, one of the Philistine cities. And then we came to this very odd pasuk, which we said we need to put this to one side, this pasuk, because it doesn't fit in here, and we'll come back to it later, which was verse 4. So we'll do that now. We'll not go do verse 4 now. We'll carry on where we got to in this story, which is verse 5. But just before we do so, okay, no, not before we do so. Let's do it first, and then we'll discuss what goes on. Jeffrey, verse 5, please.
The sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechav and Baanah, went forth and arrived in the heat of the day at the house of Ish-Boshet, while he was having his afternoon rest. Behold, they entered into the house, posing as wheat merchants, and struck him in the 5th rib, when Rechav and his brother Baanah escaped. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, one more. No, two more.
After they had entered the house while he was asleep in his bedroom, and struck him and killed him, they had severed his head. They then took his head and travelled through the Arava all night. They brought the head of Ish-Boshet to David in Hebron, and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ish-Boshet, son of Saul, your enemy, who sought to take your life. Hashem has granted my lord the king revenge from Saul and his offspring this day."
Okay, so if we had to summarize those psukim, we would say what? How would you summarize those psukim?
Sorry, Johnny, can you share the screen so that we can see the
sorry. I forgot to share the screen. How silly of me. There you go.
Thanks.
I'm looking at the screen as Jeffrey's reading. There you go. So verse 5 onwards. What Jeffrey's just read out, you can read it to yourselves again. Verse 5, 6, 7, and 8. How would you summarize those verses?
bit gruesome.
Okay, tell me what happened in your own words, Johnny.
No, I'm going to come out and just heard it quickly. This sounds like went in cutting off heads and things.
Right, so they went in,
horrible.
they cut off his head, and they took him back to David. That's basically what it says. We're going to delve into it in great detail, as we always do. But the basic story of those 4 psukim is that these 2 guys who were heads of Gedud, we spoke about a Gedud last week as well, who were the heads of the battalions or the brigades, whatever they are, they went, what was it, Peter, in the end?
Gedud's a battalion.
A battalion, okay. I'm none the wiser, to be honest, because I don't actually know the difference.
Right.
But I think a brigade is a chativa, is it that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, they were Kanakas. These 2, they were Kanakas. They went into the king. They cut his head off and took it to David. Now then, that was basically what happened. Why would they do that?
Because
Gain favour with David.
Okay, that's one reason to gain favor with David. They say, and they came back. If you read verse 8 again, you'll see that they try to ingratiate themselves with David. Here is the head of Ish-Boshet, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord has granted my lord the king vengeance this day of Saul and of his seed. So these 2 Kanakas come in with his head. And why would they want to ingratiate themselves with David, Hannah?
They saw an opportunity. Avner was dead. They saw an opportunity taking a senior role in David's army.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think they saw possibility of a reward or a position of importance in the army. Yeah, so that would be one reason why they would do it. Any other reasons why they would do it?
Well, they thought that Ish-Boshet was a lousy king, not a great leader, and therefore wanted to dispose of him.
Okay, and to take his head to David for the reason that Hannah said.
Yes.
Okay, that fits in. Yes, Philip, you're muted.
Yeah, I just want to know, was Ish-Boshet his given name? How could
No, we spoke about this a few weeks ago. I don't think you were there.
I think I asked the question, but I forgot the answer. What you gave me?
We don't think that was his real name, because why would you call your child Ish-Boshet? Boshet comes from busha, shame. Why would you call your kid a shameful man? You wouldn't. So it probably was not his given name at his bris, but that's what he came to be known as. Okay, so we said last week, did we not, that these fellows were from where were they from, these 2 folks?
Sorry to interrupt again, but Barbara's just written to me, can you let the Westbrooks into the shir?
Oh, I didn't see them there. Yes, very good. Thank you for interrupting that. Didn't see they were waiting, got carried away. All right, they're on their way in. There they go. So we said last week that these folk were from where? Can you remember where they were from?
Benjamin.
They were from Binyamin, that's right, but because it says so. But we worked out they were from Beirut. And where was Beirut? I showed you the pasuk in Yehoshua. There's your clue.
Well, it talks about the Aravah, so it's not where I think it should be.
It was near Ramallah, wasn't it?
Near Ramallah was Beirut, yes. But where were they from biblically, these folk?
Jericho.
Oh, they were Gidonim.
Givonim, that's right. They were Gibeonites, remember?
Yes.
They were Gibeonites. There was Givonim who made the deal with Yehoshua by duping him and making him think that they would come from a long way away. Remember the story? They were from Givon. How do we know that? Because when we looked in Yehoshua and the story of Givon, we see that one of the Givonite cities was Be'erot. And this is stressing that these people came from Be'erot. Now, having remembered that they were from Givon, does that give them another motive for killing Ish-Boshet? The answer is yes.
Yes.
What is that motive? Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it if the answer was no. So the answer is yes. What would being a Givonite give them a motive to kill Shaul's son?
And Shaul killed a lot of them.
Yes, exactly. This is called revenge. Shaul killed a lot of them, killed a whole bunch of Gibeonites. We're going to read later on that David actually tries to appease the Gibeonites for Shaul's very bad treatment of it. It sort of reminds me, we'll get to it in more detail later, but David, a later king, tries to make up for what his predecessor did bad against the Gibeonites. It's a bit like people today trying to, make reparations for the slave trade or whatever it is that previous generations did. And there's a sort of a responsibility on leaders in future generations to right the wrongs of their predecessors. So it's quite an interesting little aside, but we'll come to that when we come to the story of David and the Gibeonites. But at the moment, Paul is right that Shaul had massacred people from Givon, and these people may well have wanted to get their revenge on them and thereby killed Ish-Boshet. So we have two separate motives for this murder of Ish-Boshet. Number one, to ingratiate themselves with David, perhaps get a role in the army as a senior guy. And secondly, or maybe firstly, who knows, revenge against the family of Shaul. Now, why am I laboring this point? Because now I want to read the Psukim again more carefully and tell me what strikes you as being a little odd. Let's read them again, Jeffrey, please. 5, 6, and 7. Don't need 8 this time. 5, 6, and 7.
The sons of Rimmon, the Berothite, Rechav and Baanah, went forth and arrived in the heat of the day at the house of Ish-Boshet, while he was having his afternoon rest. Behold, they entered into the house, posing as wheat merchants, and struck him in the 5th rib. Then Rechav and his brother Baanah escaped. After they had entered the house while he was asleep in his bed, in his bedroom, and struck him and killed him, they had severed his head. They then took his head and travelled through the Arava all night.
Stop there. Now, the way Jeffrey read it, there is not any problem at all. Makes perfect sense. But unfortunately, the translation that Jeffrey read out, one second, I'll come to you in a minute, Philip. The translation that Jeffrey read out from the Art Scroll is not an accurate translation. What the Art Scroll has done has answered a question which I have not yet asked, which obviously it asked itself and has altered the translation of the words to fit. And the reason is this. Let me read you the Hebrew and you will see what the problem is. I'm on verse 6. Vehena ba'u ad toch habayit lokche chitim. And they came into the midst of the house, buyers of wheat. It doesn't say posing as buyers of wheat, it just says buyers of wheat, maybe with buyers of wheat, who knows? There is no conjunctive there. Vayakulu el chomesh, and they struck him in the chomesh, the 5th rib. We're familiar with that expression, aren't we? Where's the 5th rib?
Heart.
Yeah, just over the heart. So they killed him, they made him a fatal blow. V'Rechav u'Baanah achiv nimlatu, and Rechav and his brother Baanah escaped. Vayavo habayit, and they came to the house. V'hu shochev al mitato, and he is lying on his bed. B'chadar mishkavo, in his bedroom. Vayakuhu, and they struck him. Vayamituhu, and they killed him. Vayasiru et rosho, and they took off his head. Vayichu et rosho, and they took his head. Vayelchu derech arava kol halayla, and they went through the arava all night. What have I said differently to what Jeffrey said?
Yeah.
Go on, Philip.
I think that they killed two guys. According to this translation and according to the Hebrew text, they didn't kill one fella. They must have made a mistake the first time, and they went back and killed him and did it again.
Okay, very good, Philip. I don't know that they killed two fellows, but according to this, they went back, didn't they?
Yeah.
Now, which is not what Jeffrey said. Here, the end of verse 6 is they killed him and they escaped. Verse 7.
Maybe. Yeah.
Wait, one sec. Verse 7. They come into the house and he's lying on his bed, and then they remove his head. So it sounds the way the Hebrew is, and in fact the way the translation is on the screen, that they killed him, ran away, and then came back,
take his head,
and severed his head.
But the
Now,
first,
Jeffrey,
Steinsaltz just says this verse is to describe in more detail the assassination.
Exactly. That's one explanation. And that's the explanation that the art scroll has taken on board, because Jeffrey said when he translated verse 7, because I was listening very carefully for it, I haven't got the art scroll in front of me, but once I heard it, I understood. He said, whilst they were in the house, or something like that. Yes, Jeffrey? Verse 7?
While he was lying on the bed.
While he was, after they entered the house while he was asleep in his bed, in his bedroom, and struck him and killed him.
So the implication there is exactly what Rav Steinsaltz says, is that verse 7 comes to explain in more detail verse 6. Well, why would you do that? Why, if you're the author, why wouldn't you just write it properly in the first place? Why would you write verse 6 and then have to go back and write verse 7? Yes, Peter.
6, it doesn't say that they killed him. It just said they struck him. It didn't say he was dead after. It didn't say that when he struck him in the 5th rib. It didn't actually say they killed him.
Okay, so either way, as it stands in the Hebrew, they ran away and then came back, right?
Yeah.
But why would okay, so that's a question. Why would they do that?
It's not uncommon for the Bible to write things twice. In fact, it starts off at the very beginning of the Torah, and it writes the story of creation twice. Yeah. We find in various places, and don't ask me where because I'm not sure right now from memory, but there are places where it describes the same thing twice. Yeah, I think you're right, it does. But usually that is, you'll say, for example, Hashem said to Moshe, and the children of Israel shall cross over on dry land. And then it says, and the children of Israel crossed over in dry land. So they're saying what will happen and then what happened. Here, this is an odd thing. It's odd. It doesn't, and many of them are flourishing, pick up on this. It's odd. It doesn't run smoothly. Yes, Philip.
Okay, listen, this may sound a bit funny what I'm going to tell you, but it's not meant to be. I always have this this theory that history repeats itself, and I see it the whole time, everywhere I go, and especially here in Israel. One of the reasons that in Israel there's almost 100% employment is because everything has to be done twice or 3 times because of the amateurism of the people. And these guys were amateurs too. And they just went, they thought they'd killed him. They might have only wounded him, and they heard him shouting or screaming or whatever, and they went back to finish the job.
Okay,
And
could be. I think
They were senior officers in the army.
yeah, they were senior officers in the army, so I don't think they may have been incompetent senior
Wait a
officers.
minute, wait a minute.
Anyway,
Let's
let me tell you.
talk about the Israeli army today, because there are certain points in the Israeli army when I talk to some of my general friends, and I have a couple, they also say that there's a bit of an inefficiency wherever you go.
No doubt.
Except in one place in our military services, and that's the Air Force. But all the rest, it's more or less, happy-go-lucky.
I think the Navy would dispute that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not get into a discussion about military strategy in Israel. Okay, so
I think that they went back to get a reason to go to David and profit from the killing.
Okay,
it wasn't enough just to kill him. They had a second thought, and they thought, oh, we can get something out of this.
Okay, so there's the point. They had a second thought. The issue here is if you were planning an operation, and you had initially thought that I'm going to take his head and go to David with it for whatever reason, then you would not want to put yourself at risk of going in twice. You do it all in one job. So I think Hannah must be right that the primary, and this is why I was stressing what I stressed before, the primary motive for these two people was not to ingratiate themselves with David, but was revenge against the family of Saul for what he did to the Givonim. However, once they'd done the job and they'd got away with it and they'd escaped, I think that they had a second thought and thought, hang on a minute, we might be able to do a deal here. We might be able to profit from this. Let's go back and sever his head. So I think now, when the reason that the Art Scroll and other commentators translate it as they do is because they thought about this problem and they came up with the answer that verse 7 is actually only describing what went on in more detail in verse 6. I don't agree with that personally. I think it's the Radak who says that they they changed their mind and went back to do the job again and to take the head off. And it could well be, because it doesn't just say he took the head off, it says they struck him, and in verse 7. So it could well be that Philip is right, that they might not have done a full job, and they went back, made sure he was dead, and then took his head off. So it's just an interesting the way it's put together, and the Radak thinks it's significant that they went back a second time, and that makes them opportunists. Now, opportunists fall into two categories. There are opportunists who see an opportunity, take that opportunity, and make a great success of it. And there are others who do see an opportunity or think there's an opportunity for a quick buck and fall flat on their face. What do you think? Which category do you think these two chaps fell into?
The second.
Second.
Yeah, the second. Let's have a look and see what happened.
They're
So,
going to
verse
get
8.
by David, probably.
Verse 8.
Sorry,
Again, Jeffrey, please.
John,
Verse 8.
Sorry, Johnny.
Yes, David, we can't see you.
Okay, could I just ask the good doctor about the difference in translation of the word chomesh?
Chomesh means the fifth.
Okay, you translated it as the fifth rib. Look in Koren and look at Rav Bazak, they translate it as the groin.
Yes, we've had that before, because one of the in fact, two people were killed in the Chomesh, weren't they? We've had this in the last few weeks. Who else was killed in the Chomesh, in the fifth rib or the groin?
Shaul. Shaul?
I'm not sure Shaul was one of them.
Avner.
Yeah.
And who else?
Yoav? No.
No, Yoav's not dead yet.
He will be, though.
Yoav's
he will.
brother. Yoav's brother.
Yes, Yoav's brother. What was he
one
called?
of the brothers. One of the brothers that were David's nephew.
Correct. What was he called?
Something with yeah. Can't remember.
Asahel. Asahel, he was called. And who killed him in the Chomesh?
Avner.
And who killed Avner in the Chomesh?
Yoav.
Correct. And you'll see that Yoav eventually gets his comeuppance as well. And you'll have to wait and see whether he gets it in the Chomesh or not. So yes, David is right. The translation of Chomesh in the Koren and in Rav Bazak is that it's the groin. I don't particularly like that.
There's a Hebrew word for groin. It's not Chomesh.
Chomesh is obviously from the root of 5. You would want to aim for the fifth rib because it overlies the heart. So I don't know why they translate it as the groin, really. David, have you any suggestions as to why that is called the groin?
In Hebrew, the word for groin is mifsa.
Mifsa.
Mifsa is groin, yeah.
Okay.
Rob Steinsaltz translates it as stomach here, Johnny.
Stomach?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that isn't the groin or the fifth rib.
No, he translates it. Lower stomach. Lower
stomach could be the groin, I guess. I'm just interested into how they get Chomesh to be the groin. I wonder if, what does Rashi say? Anything about it? No, Rashi doesn't help us. Okay, well, maybe that's a bit of homework for somebody. Find out why Chomesh is translated as groin. Okay, so they come to David and they have this whole speech. Do that verse 8 for us again, Jeffrey, please.
They brought the head of Ish-Boshet to David in Hebron and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ish-Boshet, son of Saul, your enemy, who sought to take your life. Hashem has granted my lord the king revenge from Saul and his offspring this day."
And so there they go. They make this whole speech and they present Ish-Boshet's head on a platter, and they stand there expecting their little reward or their great reward from David. But if they had read Shmuel Aleph, they would know that that wasn't likely to happen. Why not? What story?
The Midianite, the one who killed Saul, came and said to David, "I've done it," and he got killed himself.
Yes and no. Yes, that's the story. That there was a guy that came along, wasn't he? He was an Amalekite lad. And what did he do?
He told David that he killed Saul.
He told David that Saul was dead. Right? And what did David do? Well, why did he tell David that Saul was dead?
Because he thought David would be happy.
He thought David would be pleased and he'd give him a reward. And was David pleased?
No.
No.
No. And what happened to the poor lad?
He got killed.
He got killed, correct.
For his trouble.
So for his trouble in telling David that Saul was dead, he got killed. Now, he hadn't even done it himself. So these two obviously either were not aware of that story that had gone on, or were very stupid, because the David had demonstrated all the way through his entire dealings with Saul, had demonstrated something very special.
Yeah.
And that was his relationship with Shaul was not a reciprocal relationship of hatred.
No.
Okay? Because Shaul tried to kill David, but David had 2 opportunities to kill Shaul and did not do so. And he wouldn't let Doeg do it, and he wouldn't let anybody do it.
Yeah.
There was a difference because Shaul was, David's reason was because Shaul was God's anointed, but Ish-Boshet wasn't.
Fair comment. Fair comment. I hadn't thought of that. Okay. All right. Let's say you're right. Let's say you're right that David's relationship with Shaul was because he was God's anointed, and that is undoubtedly true because he says it on a number of occasions. Ish-Boshet, probably not God's anointed because David was God's anointed after Shaul. Fair comment. However, there is still a problem, and we'll see what David responds to Rechav and Baanah. Verse 9, Jeffrey.
David answered Rechav and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, As Hashem lives, who has redeemed my soul from all adversity? If the one who informed me, saying, Behold, Saul is dead, saw himself as a bearer of good tidings, yet I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, instead of giving him reward for his tidings, surely this should be done to wicked people who have killed an innocent man in his house upon his bed. Shall I not avenge his blood from your hand and eradicate you from the earth?
Okay, so that actually supports Paul's theory very nicely, because what does David actually say? David says, he reminds Rechav and Baanah that the lad who told him Saul is dead, and he thought that in his eyes this was a good thing, and I told him it wasn't a good thing, and I gave him what for, and I killed him instead of giving him a reward, and he didn't even do anything. But you, wicked men, you are wicked men, you killed an Ish Tzaddik. The Hebrew says an Ish Tzaddik. Now, how do we translate as a tzaddik normally?
Righteous.
Righteous. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that here, because Ish-Boshet may not have been righteous, but one thing he was, at least in David's eyes,
innocent. Yeah.
Was innocent. Okay, and tzaddik can mean innocent as well. So here, what he says is, you've killed an innocent man lying in his own house in his bed. That's a despicable thing to say. And Paul is right. He does not say, and you shouldn't have stretched out your hand against God's anointed. So what David is upset about is that these people have killed an innocent man and done so clearly for
revenge,
personal gain,
oh.
in order to ingratiate himself with David. David does not take into account the revenge motive that there might have been because they were Gibeonites, but he does in verse 10 when he's talking about the previous chap, the Amalekite lad. He implies that these wicked men have done the same thing, which is they expected a reward for bringing good tidings, and they have very much misjudged David's response to the slaying of Ish-Boshet. And so David says, this is a bad thing that you've done, and I've got no choice really And so what did he do? Verse 12, Jeffrey.
David then commanded the soldiers, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung them over the pool in Hebron. Then they took the head of Ish-Boshet and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron.
Okay, now that's an interesting thing to do.
Why did they do that?
Good question. Why did they do that?
Because Abner, didn't he make him king after the death of Saul and the others?
No, he may have been Abner's illegitimate son.
Where'd you get that from, Philip?
Just an idea. Listen, they did the same things as people do today. They did the same things.
Comment.
Let's just take the pasuk slowly. David
Well,
commanded
I've got a comment.
One sec. Let's just read it slowly. Let's read it again. David commanded the young men, and they slew them. Fair enough. And cut off their hands and feet. Why did they cut off their hands and feet?
Why did they do that?
I want to say something.
Go on.
I've just finished reading a book about the Middle East, a novel, actually, but a reasonably well-researched novel. And it's about the Arabs and the fall of Khartoum, which is much later than David. But apparently there's culture in this area where cutting off the hands and the feet are a punishment for not behaving properly. It's not like in Saudi Arabia where it comes from where you cut off a person's hand if they steal. This apparently is a form of killing somebody. You cut off their hands and their legs and you cut off their heads. Apparently is cultural, and it was done a lot. So it could just be a cultural thing here too.
Okay.
But this is the way people behave in this area of the world.
Okay, so yes, all of that is correct. Yes, Johnny, you're muted. We can't hear you, Johnny. You're muted.
I just agree with Hannah because Rob Shinesell says it was an act of degradation.
Yeah.
So, okay, correct.
So it was that sort of.
It was an act of degradation. And according to the Quran, this was cutting off hands and feet was done to disable one's enemies. Okay, so you haven't killed them yet, but you've disabled them by chopping off their hands and their feet. And it was done to shame them, to prevent them from mounting future opposition. Now, he also refers us back to a story that we've learnt together. And that is the story of Adoni-Bezek. What happened to him? He was a Canaanite king. He had his big toe and his thumbs cut off, remember? And then he describes 70 kings that he did it to. That's how powerful it was. That it was a thing to cut off the big toe and the thumb. And that showed that you were the dominant person and these people were subservient to you. So cutting off bits of people goes back all the way back to Shoftim. That's what you did when they were still alive. This is slightly different, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
This prophet said they killed them first, and then they cut hands and feet.
That's right. This was a different story. What they're referring to there with Adoni-Bezek, they were still alive, and this was a degradation for them to walk around without a thumb and without a big toe. Everybody would see that, and they would know that they had been conquered and they had been humiliated. As you know, humiliation actually can be worse than death. People who are facing humiliation often take their own lives because they can't face the humiliation and the degradation. So chopping off a bit of the body, fingers and toes, seems to be a method going back a long way of disabling your enemies and shaming and degrading your enemies. Now, I heard something many years ago, which has just popped into my head, and I don't know whether it's true or it's not, but there is an English, and I think it is very peculiarly English gesture, which is very rude. Okay, and it involves two fingers. You're all familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yes, that. Yeah. Right. Remember, I don't know about you, but when you were kids, you know, right? It was a rude gesture. In other countries, it's the middle finger. Philip has just given us that, but in England, it was that thing, two fingers. Now, I heard somewhere, and I don't know where I read it. It might be rubbish, this, but I've definitely read this somewhere, that the reason that is an English gesture to somebody to tell them to get lost, for want of a better phrase, and it comes from when they were fighting the French. And when they captured a French soldier who was an archer, they had bows and arrows, they would cut off their two fingers so that they would not be able to pull back the bow and arrow. And so, as it were, the Englishmen, by showing their two fingers, was saying to the opposition, to the French, look, we've still got our two fingers and you haven't, and therefore you are degraded. Now, I read that many years ago, and it may be nonsense, I don't know, but anybody else heard that, by the way? Anybody heard that?
Yeah, I've heard this.
You've heard of that explanation?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it only just popped into my head just now, otherwise I would have looked it up before the shield.
The English archers, they fired only with one finger, and that's why the Italians did this to the English.
Okay, maybe that's true as well. So cutting off the fingers and the toes, that seems to be something which is quite well known. But here, they're already dead. So why is he cutting off their hands and their feet? Why not cut off their head? Because that's what they did to Ish-Boshet. Any suggestions?
They're extracting retribution.
Maybe the head is too extreme. The head is too extreme, and that's why.
Jeffrey, what were you saying?
Torturing. They were torturing him.
No, they're already dead.
We're dead, yeah.
Ah, okay.
So why the hands and the feet? Why they cut off the hands and the feet? Okay, somebody mentioned it before. Wait a minute, Seckford. Somebody mentioned before that there is a culture of chopping off the hands of thieves, right? I think that they had their hands and feet cut off because their feet took them running to David, to the opposition, and their hands were carrying Ish-Boshet's head. And I think that this was a demonstration to all around them that if you use your hands and feet for these wicked means, then that's what happens to you. You'll get your hands and feet chopped off. So they had their hands and feet chopped off. But not only that, then what happened? Jeffrey, what did they do next after they chopped their hands and feet off? Where is it? Verse 12.
David then commanded the soldiers and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung them over the pool in Hebron.
They hung them over the pool in Hebron. Did that what you said? They hung them? That's not correct. It's hanged.
Hanged.
Does it say hung in that the art scroll?
James says hung.
Hanged.
Hung is
People
correct.
don't know how to speak English. Hanged.
The present, the past tense, the past of hang is hung. I'm sorry.
Not when you're
Maybe
talking
that's-
about human beings, it isn't. Meat is hung, human beings are hanged. So he hanged them hang them up beside the pool in Hebron. Why did he hang them in the pool of Hebron?
Beside the pool.
Sorry, what'd you say, Peter?
No, beside the pool in Hebron.
Yeah, why did he hang them beside the pool in Hebron?
Just hang them out to dry.
Hang them out to dry. Well, they were there. They were there to show the public, to shame them, right? So that the public would see them, they would be humiliated. Why in the pool of Hebron? What had occurred at the pool of Hebron?
Avner had the soldiers fighting.
No.
No.
That was up in the north. Well, further north from there anyway. It was on the border of Binyamin and Yehuda. Let's just have a look. Am I mistaken? Did not Yoav kill Avner at the pool of Hebron?
Yeah, he did.
Under the fifth rib. You return to Hebron. We've definitely mentioned the pool of Hebron. I think that Yoav was killed by Avner. Yoav killed Avner by the pool in Hebron.
27, verse 27.
27. Yeah. We definitely mentioned the pool of Hebron at some point. Where did we mention it?
Anyway, I thought you were supposed to cut them down by the evening.
You are. Maybe it did. Doesn't say he left them there overnight.
Well, if he's putting there for an example, we'd leave them for, I don't know.
May have done it in the morning and cut them down in the evening. Where did we find the pool of Hebron? We definitely had the pool of Hebron because I showed you a picture of it.
I think because I think the pool of Hebron, some were camped on the north and some were camped on the south, and I seem to recall.
Here we go. Yes, where they are. Chapter 2, verse 12 and 13. And actually, Hannah was right. That was where they had the thingies, the 12 verses 12. That's exactly where it was. Have a look at that on the screen, Jeffrey. Verse 12 and 13.
And Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ish-Boshet, the son of Saul, went out of Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and David's servants went out and met them together by the pool of Gibeon. They sat down, these on one side of the pool and these on the other side of the pool.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm getting all mixed up here. This is the pool of Gibeon. This is not the pool of Hebron. Okay. All right. So we were all slightly right and all slightly wrong. Hannah was right that there was a pool involved where there was 12, but it wasn't the pool of Hebron. And I was slightly right that Avner was killed by Yoav in Hebron, but by the gate and not by the well. So that was all a bit mixed up. Okay. Anyway, I think he was hung up by the pool of Hebron, presumably because that was a public place. And you are probably right, Paul, that they would have cut them down before the end of the day, because that is in the Torah, isn't it? You have to cut them down before the end of the day. And then they took the head of Ish-Boshet and they buried it in the grave of Avner in Hebron. Why would they do that?
I said so before.
Because Avner was the illegitimate son of Ish-Boshet. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. You made it up.
What did he make up?
No, he promoted Ish-Boshet to be the king after the others had died.
Well, he didn't promote him. He was a natural successor. He was a son of Saul.
The same reason they buried Esav's head in Me'arat HaMachpelah. They wanted to bury him with a body. Yeah, so they think, because they buried Esav's head in Me'arat HaMachpelah. Why?
Well, I'm not so sure they did. If you look at the Midrash carefully, Chush ben Dan chopped Esau's head off, and the Midrash says that the head rolled into Ma'arat HaMachpelah. I don't think that they buried it in there. I think, according to the Midrash, it rolled in of its own accord. But I'm interested here.
No, it doesn't say that they took it out either.
No, that's true.
The
They couldn't find it.
art scroll says that David recognized that Abner had been the protector of Ish-Boshet for many years.
Okay, Leslie, you've got two.
I have.
And you're giving us feedback. Can you close one of them off?
I will indeed.
Johnny says there was no convenient place for the buried his head with his relative Avner.
Okay.
No, it was for the loyalty that David wished to recognise by burying the head in Abner's tomb.
I didn't. It's still echoing. Leslie, say it again.
I'm sorry. It says here in total, David recognised that Abner had been the protector of Ish-Boshet for many years. This was the loyalty that David wished to recognise by burying the head in Abner's tomb.
Okay, I got it in the end. So for those of you that couldn't hear that echoey thing, what Leslie read out was that Abner had been a loyal servant, a loyal general of Ish-Boshet, or at least of Shaul's for many years, and therefore it was fitting as in terms of loyalty for Ish-Boshet's head to be buried with Avner. Now, I think there's another reason for it. It's my own opinion, so you can feel free to disagree. I think like this. In the previous chapter, when Avner was killed by Yoav, that caused David a lot of grief, because the people of Shaul's folk, Ish-Boshet's folk, needed to be persuaded that David didn't have anything to do with Avner's death, and that he wasn't guilty of telling Yoav to go and kill Avner. Remember, we went through that in detail. He had to go over the top with his mourning rituals and his sitting shiva and carrying on with himself with the hesped for Avner. And he was successful. The people at first were not impressed and thought that David had caused Avner to be killed. And afterwards they were persuaded that David was in fact innocent of Avner's death. And David buried Avner with honors, with a kavod. Now, if the people had thought initially that David's actions in having Avner killed were negative, and it took a hell of a lot of work by David to persuade them otherwise, the next minute he's holding Ish-Boshet's head. What are the people going to think? They're going to go back to their original thoughts and think, we were right first time. David had Avner killed, and now he's had Ish-Boshet killed, and he's got his head. They're not going to necessarily know the whole story of Rechav and Baanah and all that stuff that we've just read about. All they can see is here's David with Ish-Boshet's head. David's got another problem on his hands. He's trying to unite the people, and at every turn, somebody's coming along and spoiling it for him. Yoav spoiled it for him last week when he killed Avner, and this week these two idiots have come with Ish-Boshet's head, showing the people of Ish-Boshet that David is again potentially responsible for the death of their king. And so therefore I think that they buried the head of Ish-Boshet in a honorable way, in the grave of Avner, who had been buried and mourned in an honorable way, to demonstrate the same thing that David had to demonstrate previously. In other words, to put Ish-Boshet in the same category as Avner, i.e. somebody whom David would mourn and not whom David would want to kill or have killed. And that's why, in contrast, he strung up these people that did it, no doubt with a big sign saying, this is what happened to people who kill an innocent man in his bed, and I had nothing to do with it. These are schlechters, and Ish-Boshet was a good fellow. He was the king, and I'm going to give him an honorable burial together with his general Avner, and we're going to put his head in the grave of Avner in a covered dicker way. So I think that verse 12 is a verse of contrasts. It's a verse that's telling us that David again is having to work hard to unite the people, because otherwise he's going to have he's going to have a rebellion on his hands. He averted a rebellion by the skin of his teeth when Joab killed Avner, and now these two Chachomim have come and caused him further problems by bringing him Ish-Boshet's head, and he's having to show symbolically the whole time. He's having to demonstrate the symbolism that he is not responsible for the division in the people. On the contrary, he wants to bring the people together. So I think that's the story here. It's another story showing David's great leadership.
In addition, Johnny, something?
Yes, Ivor.
In addition to everything you said, he's also saying, look, this is how I treat even my enemy. After all, Shaul was his enemy, everybody knew. But I will take Nakama, vengeance, against anybody who attacks us in this way.
Okay, could be, except that Shaul was not his enemy. David was Shaul's enemy.
Yeah, okay. But as far as the people were concerned, they knew they weren't in love with each other.
Yes, maybe. I just want to, before we finish, Rav Bazak brings a very interesting concept here, and he quotes the Septuagint. Anybody know what the Septuagint is?
The translation of them from Hebrew, Latin,
Greek.
Something to do with 7, right?
Yeah, it was the English translation, not the English translation. It was the translation into Greek of the Bible, which was done when, Paul?
A while ago.
That is true. It was done a while ago. Can you be a little more accurate?
It was divided into 7 parts then, not 5, right?
No, the Septuagint is because there were 70 Chachamim who were given the task of translating the Bible into Greek. And that's why it's called the Septuagint. It was done in Alexandria. And it was done when?
Didn't they all translate it the same way or something?
Yes.
Second century AD.
What?
2nd century AD.
No, there was no Greek Empire in the 7th century CE.
Between
the 3rd and the 1st centuries BC.
Correct. The 3rd century BCE. Correct. Well done, Google. The 3rd century BCE, the Septuagint was written. Now, the Septuagint has a completely different reading of our verse about the killing of Ish-Boshet. One of the things we didn't speak about, which was interesting, and I forgot to speak about it, was the wheat sellers. How do we understand this? We understood it, I think, that these people came in posing as wheat sellers. Yeah, they knocked on the door and, you ordered the wheat and we have come to deliver it. It's a good ruse to get inside the house. The Septuagint has a totally different reading. And it says like this. and behold, they came thither into the midst of the house, as though they would have bought wheat, and they smote him in the groin, and Rechav and Baanah and his brother escaped. That's what we've got. The Septuagint reads like this: and behold, the doorkeeper of the house was cleaning wheat, and she slumbered and slept, and Rechav and Baanah, his brother, escaped. A completely different story. So we don't need to go into why the Septuagint might have changed the story, but the Septuagint there has written a story which is much easier to understand, right? The woman who's meant to be guarding the door, she's fallen asleep and allowed Rechav and Baanah to enter the house stealthily. And the wheat was to do with her. She was meant to be cleaning wheat while she's guarding the place. She sat at the doorway cleaning wheat, and she's nodded off, and that was how they were able to get in. Now, what Rav Bazak says, which is really interesting, is doesn't really matter that there's a difference there. That's another interesting thing. But he says this: if you have two versions of an event, one of which makes sense, and one of which is very difficult to explain because there are difficulties with the language of it, which one is likely to be the original version? The easy one or the difficult one?
The difficult one.
Why?
Because the translators would take a license to make.
That's right. So these Septuagint folk, these 70 Talmidei Chachamim who were translating it, who were they translating it for?
The Greeks.
The Greeks. That's right. And what would they not have wanted?
To have any differences.
They wouldn't have want the Greeks to have picked up on something which didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So according to Rav Bazak, it's much more likely that the Septuagint actually is not the original, even though the Masoretic text that we have actually is the earliest Masoretic text that we have. It post-dates the Septuagint. So it's more likely, however, that what the Masoretic text that we have is the original, because it would make no sense for a later version to be made difficult. It makes much more sense for a later version to be made easier. And I thought that was a very, very interesting idea, an interesting logic to that. So I thought I would share that with you. Right, that is the end of chapter 4. We will see in chapter 5 when we come back next time. No, we have not finished chapter 4. No, I beg your pardon. We will have to do next time. We missed out a pasuk, didn't we? We missed out pasuk 4. Let's just read it, and then we'll know what we're talking about next time. Not that you'll remember. Jeffrey, verse 4.
Jonathan, it's in brackets this. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame. He had been 5 years old when word came from Jezreel about the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. His nursemaid had picked him up and fled, and in her hurry to flee, she dropped him and he became lame. His name was Ish-Boshet.
Okay, now in the middle of this whole story is this plonked here, and that's why it's in brackets in the art school, because it makes sense to be here at all. And we need to go through this pasuk next time. First of all, we need to know what is it doing here in the middle of nowhere, completely out of context, and why are we being told it at all? So that is next time's shiur. We will do verse 4.
I have a problem with this.
Go on.
The child's name was Mephi-Boshet. as in Boshet, the king.
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
He was the king's nephew.
Yes, but the name is not supposed to be a good name.
I imagine that wasn't his name either. I imagine that it was shameful to be lame and to be a cripple. So I imagine that wasn't his real name either. For the same reason.
Also, was he lame before she dropped him? Because
no.
A 5-year-old doesn't need to be carried. A 5-year-old moves around on their own quite well.
Well, I don't know. If you're running away, and if I had a 5-year-old and I was running away, I would pick him up and run because I can run faster than a 5-year-old. So I think that's probably what happened. Right, we're out of time. Chag Sameach to everybody. Now, next week is Chol HaMoed, so we won't have. Oh no, next week is Yom Tov, so we definitely won't have a shiur. The following week is Isru Chag. Don't see why we shouldn't right now, but you never know, that might change. As of now, we will have a shiur 2 weeks today on Shmuel Bet. Chag Sameach. Enjoy.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you.